looking at using line and curve labels in Civil 3D. Oops. What we'll be going over today is we'll start off by exploring various styles, line and curve label styles, and then we'll be looking at parcel line label styles. There's a bit of a difference between them and regular lines, so we'll be looking at those differences. And we'll be exploring the table styles for the segments of the lines and curves. We'll do a demonstration of creating creating a copy of existing labels and looking at some of the nuances of that. Then we'll get back into our PowerPoint, hopefully, and looking at how we can, the nuances of labeling and repositioning these labels, and also what's involved with creating tables and tags, and then we'll be demonstrating that as well. And then we'll wrap up, give a summary of what we just did through, and then there'll be some time for Q&A at the end. So let's get started. So as I said, there's a difference between line and curves for general purposes and lines and curves for parcels. So we'll start off with the line and curve labels, and they are all grouped on the settings tab of the tool space. And the line and curves labels are at the very top under general for multi-purpose styles. And in that we have a category for line and a category for curves. You may note that there's no category here for tables. The tables are handled under parcels. Also note that there's a little clipboard next to a little clip icon next to the label style, and that means that it's referenced. So it's clipped like because it's referenced from a reference template. And I would definitely recommend referencing style. And what that means is that there's a reference template attached to this drawing that controls as many styles as you want. The advantage of that is if you need to make it change to a style company-wide or project-wide, then you can edit it in that reference template and it will get pushed through to all of the drawings that have that style referenced. The disadvantage of that is I can't make any edits to those styles in my child drawing, in this particular drawing, because it's referenced from the template. Within the settings, I can also right-click and edit the style if it's not referenced, just like I said. I can create a new style, and it becomes a child of the existing style. And then there's this relationship between the parent style and the children. So the child will take on all the aspects of the parent, but then it can have its own idiosyncrasies, kind of like regular families altogether. Then we can create copies of the style, and that will become independent of the existing style, or we can delete the styles, which is, in other words, purging the style. So when we edit, copy, or create a new child style, we have various tabs. And on the general tab, this is where we can control the layer of the label. We can, by default, we can tell it to go either in label style or in tag style. And what a tag is later on when we create tables, that tag will, the content of that label will be displayed in the table, and a tag will appear on the object itself. We can control the orientation of the label, either world, view, or object. And this is a little bit complicated to understand, but the world view is regardless of the rotation of your drawing, you can have your D view twist, or you can rotate the entire drawing. The labels will always stay pointing true north. That's the world view. Object means that the label is aligned with the object, so it will follow the bearing of the line itself. Or view means, as I just said, if the view is twisted through, plan or profile sheets or D view twist or whatever, the labels will always remain parallel to the twisted view or the plan profile view. And finally, we have plan readability, which means that, as I was just mentioning, as the view itself twists, or as the object twists in terms of contours, at a certain bias, at a certain level, it will flip itself so the text will not appear upside down. It gets complicated. On our layout tab, this is where we can control each individual component of the label. For example, we have bearing, we have distance. In this particular example, we even have a direction arrow. And for each individual component, we can control the position of that component, if it's anchored to the component itself, to the feature, or if it's anchored to another part of the component, for example, direction or bearing. And we can control the color of the individual color of the component, the contents of the component, for example, for distance, how many decimal places do we want? And we can also add different components or delete components in this layout tab. And finally, we have the drag state, and that is as we drag the label off of the component, this controls what's going to happen then. If we drag it off, is there going to be a leader? Is the leader visible or not? What type of leader is it? Is it a straight leader or a splined leader? What type of arrowhead do we have? The size of the arrowhead. And what's quite important is the display of it. It can either be stacked text or composed. And that's really a bit too difficult to explain right now, so I'll be explaining that during our demonstration. So if it is stacked text, that's where we can actually have a border around the stacked text and what the border type is, color of the border type, yada, yada, yada. So those three, the general tab, the display tab, and the drag state, those are universal for all labels within Civil 3D. For our parcel label styles, and later on when we use the parcel labels, we have all the line labels that we just had, but then it also has its own unique labels for parcels. And in that, this is where we see a child, and a parent and a child. You notice we have bearing and distance, which means that both the bearing and the distance are on the same line, or we have bearing over distance, which means that by default, the bearing is on top and the distance is on the bottom, but we can always flip those. And you see in this example here, we have bearing over distance, but it is flipped so that the distance is on top and the bearing is on the bottom. And you see that bearing over distance is the parent And then we have a bearing only, which is a child, and a distance only, which is a child. And we can select any label, and in the properties of the label, we can change the different styles. And I'll be demonstrating this as well. Now, another interesting part in all the labels is these expressions. And these expressions are available in any of the labels of Civil 3D. Some of them are already custom built, but we can create expressions as we need them. And basically, an expression is any other thing that we can start calculating that we want to add to the label. For example, this relatively simple expression is mid-distance, and I pick from my components here, I pick segment length, and I simply divide it by 2. And later on, I can add this as a component to different labels. Now, if you do use expressions, I would definitely recommend that you store them in the reference template so that you don't have to add these expressions or somehow drag the labels with these expressions to different drawings. If you have them in a reference template, then whatever drawing references that template, these expressions will be available. So it just adds another level of use and complexity to these labels. The segment label styles, as I mentioned earlier, they are not in the general multipurpose, but they are under parcels. And we have individual table styles for curves, for lines, or segments. And basically what a segment is, it will combine the line and the curve together in one table. The tags are listed in the table, and those tags, that particular row identified by that tag, will have the length and the bearing and the radius if it's a curve. And by default, these are listed by sequence of labeling. So you may see that in this particular example, it's not sorted by the first column, L2, L1, L3, L4. And that is the way either the individual lines were selected to create the table or the way they were created. But we can change that, so if need be, I can edit that segment label style, yes. And simply in the data properties, I can tell it to sort the data. And when I do sort the data, it'll ask me which column I want to sort it on, and it defaults to 1. And in this, when we edit the properties, we can also add or delete rows. And again, getting back to these expressions, if I have my mid-distance and I want that part of the table, that can be part of this, then I can add it to this table. Okay, so let's go to our demonstration here. Okay, so this is Civil 3D 2025, but I think, yeah, everything that I'm showing, well, would probably be pertinent to virtually any Civil 3D version. And as I said, this is a tool space, Civil 3D 101 here. The prospector tab of the tool space shows all the components with all the Civil 3D components, of which, well, there's really none in this drawing. And the settings tab controls all the styles. And under my Manage tab, I have under Styles Reference, You see that I have one reference template here, AEC base styles. There's nothing stopping me from adding more reference templates. And then when I have more, I can control the order as to which takes precedence. And I can tell it which objects of this reference template I want to reference. And I can drill right down to individual components. So I would definitely recommend using reference templates. It makes your life so much easier. And here on the General tab, we have our multi-purpose styles. And here we have our label styles. And here we have the labels for lines and for curves. And you notice the little clipboard here, which means that it's part of the reference template. I'm going to right-click on this. If I go to edit this, and I'm just going to click OK. Now it's telling me that this is part of the reference template and it cannot be edited. So what do I want to do? I could make a local copy of this with a unique name. I could apply the edits for this drawing session only. And then when I save it and next time I'm open it back up, it'll revert back to the original source. Or I can cancel it. In this case, I'm going to cancel it. I could create a new, and you notice that it says child. So it actually becomes, let's click OK. And now it's, even though I didn't make any changes to it, it is now this is now my child, and so the parents and the child. I can right-click on this and delete it. So finally, I'm going to go to copy. Now this makes an independent copy of this. So it's whatever happens to the original, let's call it spline, won't affect, there's no relationship between the original and this one. Here's the General tab. Notice the layer, it's currently set to 0 because this is a general style. Therefore, the overall settings of annotating will take place. Later on, when we look at the parcels, we'll see a difference there. This is where I can change it from label to tag. And you notice when I do changes, my preview updates. These are the orientations that I talked about: object, view, or world. So for bearing and line labels, you definitely want it along the oriented with the object. And I do want it to be plan readable. So if my view changes beyond 110 degrees, it will flip it. So it remains, the text remains right side up. These are the different components I have for this. Bearing, it's actually bearing and distance. And my direction arrow. Well, let's go to our direction arrow and change the color of that. Okay, but really what I wanted to show you was, in this case, I want to have my, I'm going to make my arrow size a little bit bigger, but I wanted a spline leader. And I'm also going to change the color of it to dark blue, green. And notice that because it's stacked text, I can change all sorts of how I want this to appear. But I'm actually going to change this to as composed, and all of this gets grayed out. And I'll explain, you'll see in a minute why I'm doing this. So we have our newly created label style. And you notice that this does not have a paperclip next to it because it's not part of the reference template. Here are the expressions. I'm going to add a new expression to this and call it midpoint. And it all depends on which category it is as to which what's available for us. So I want the overall segment length. I'm just going to divide that by 2. So now I could, if I were to edit this, I can create a new component. And now I have my midpoint that I can add to this. And so here's where we need to reposition it. I want to anchor it to my bearing. Oh, sorry. Still have my label text here. Bottom center and top center. I want to reverse that top center and bottom center. There. Okay. So that's using expressions and having these expressions going into my label. So for my parcels, so this is where we have our lines. You notice there's a plus next to this. So this where I have my bearing and distance, which is the parent, and then I have my bearing child and my distance child. And again, I could put in components. And for my tables, I have line tables, curve tables, and segment tables. And you see, this is true for just about every table I can think of. This is where we can sort our data based on column 1. Notice that this one is not referenced, so I can make changes to that. But I'll do that later on during the demonstration. Okay, so let's go back to our once we do have our labels, basically labeling, we pick our label style and pick wherever we want the label to go on the object. and where we pick the object, that's going to be the default of the label. So it doesn't center it, it just puts it wherever I pick it on the object. Then when I select the label after the fact, I can flip the label so the bearing could be on top, the distance could be on the top and the bearing on the bottom. And I can slide the label along the object with the diamond grip, or I can move the label off of the object with the square grip. When it's moved off the object, then there's a whole slew of other grips that appear. And to tell you the truth, what I do is I just kind of hover over the grip and it tells me what it does because I never remember this. So the square grip allows me to reposition the label itself. Where if it is repositioned, the circular grip, the round grip, resets it to its position. And that's kind of hierarchical. So if I add elbows, which is with the plus, and I add more elbows, each time I click on the round grip, it repositions it. It's kind of like an undo of what I just did. And the diamond grip changes the leader position itself. The pluses will add a vertex, and the minuses will delete a vertex. And as I mentioned, the leaders can either be splined, in this case it is splined and has a different color, or it can be straight. You'll also notice that in this example here that it is staff text, so that if it's over on the left, it's right justified, whereas if it's over on the right, it's left justified. So it always it's always readable, and the leader does not interfere with the label itself. That's not the case as with the as composed. And then when we to create tables, we can either select individual components like lines and curves, and it will convert the label into a tag, and the L will stand for line and the C will stand for curve. And all of these have corresponding entries in the table itself. The lines will list the length and the curve, the length and the bearing, and maybe that midpoint that I just put in, where the curves will have the length, bearing, delta, and the radius. Now I can, when I create a table, I can select individual labels to go into the table in congested areas, or I could pick individual styles, and it will be all of the labels of that style will go into the table. And in this case, I can add existing table labels or existing and new. And so that any new labels I add with that particular label style will get added to the table. However, there's a very strong caveat of this in that I never could get that to work. And I'll explain that in a minute as well. Okay, and so let's try demonstrating that. So you notice that this line is one segment, this line is another segment. So I like to go to the Annotate tab and use, because usually I do annotation in I kind of get into annotation mode, and I want to annotate at the same all at the same time. Now in my add labels, I have a little pin here, which is nice. So if I get off my off my labels, it's still there but it's out of the way. So I can do my regular work and then come over here and start labeling. If I do a lot of labeling, I can pin it again. So I'm going to go to lines and curves. I have a choice of single segment, multiple segments, or line between 2 points. So for the single segment, I go to, let's go to this bearing and distance spline. My curves can stay as they are. So I select my feature, my styles, my type, and then I click add. And as I mentioned, wherever I pick the line or the object, that's where it's going to position the label. So here I have my bearing and distance and my midpoint distance and the direction arrow. And the direction arrow is magenta, like we set it up. So I can come along and pick these. And if I happen to pick a curve, and we'll put in the curves. This is a line segment. So I'm just going around and picking them. I can't do a crossing with this because it wants to know where to position it based on the point that I pick. At any time, I can change my style. Click add. I need to click add so it knows that it's a different style, that I've changed it. Okay, that's good enough. Now there's also a neat little thing, which is mid-line between 2 points. And add. And now it's looking for my points. So I just pick my 2 endpoints. And now it adds, even though there's nothing there, it adds a line, a label between those. So I'm going to hit escape out of this and unpin this so it collapses again. So these labels are dynamic, except for this one between 2 points. So currently it's 740. If I use my AutoCAD stretch command, and I stretch this up, oh, so this distance is updated, but you see this one has not because it's not tied to any object. So for this one, if I break this, use the AutoCAD break command, so it repositions the label because it's the label was where I broke it, the label was off of that. Then I'm going to go back to my labels. Add. Okay. So these are all the same bearing. So what I want to do is I want to change. I'm going to do this with my AutoCAD properties. This label I want to change to bearing over distance. And the bearing is on top and the distance is below. For this one, actually this one and this one, I'm going to select both of them. And in my properties, I want distance only. And I also want to flip my label so it goes down below. And I have to do that one at a time, I guess. Okay. And I can also do that through the right-click menu. Flip label. So now I've got my bearing on top. So because they all have the same bearing, and then I have my 3 individual distances down below. I'm going to split the screen here. Just because I want to create a table. Let's increase the scale a bit. No. Okay. So now for tables, I can, for my lines and curves, it can be a, let's first do a line table. So rather than selecting individual objects, I'm going to use this spline, and I have the choice between add existing and new. So now it's going to take all of the labels of that style, convert them to tag mode, and add them to my table. Oops. So that's really great. And if I come back and add another tag to select this one here, come on. So it adds it automatically. L10, and it adds a component to it. So far, it's working really well. So far. The problem is if I save this and I close this, and I have to talk with Autodesk about this. Just haven't gotten around to it yet. It opens up, everything looks great, and then all of a sudden it disappears. Oh yeah. It didn't. It's working. Okay, well, this didn't work before.
The one time you didn't want it to?
Yes, indeed. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. This is Murphy's Law in reverse. Okay. Okay, and let's look at these. Wow, I didn't expect it to work. Now I have these. Okay, so I want this to be in. Okay. Okay, so if I look at this drag state now, if I have my diamond here, I can slide it along, turn my snap off. So I can slide it along or I can move it off. What's going to happen if I change this to spline? It changes to L12. It adds it to this. So I changed that to my L12. I have a big arrowhead. It's green. It's splined. Whereas if I drag this one off, it's a regular arrow. I can have add my vertices. I can add vertices here too. And then the circle kind of undoes it one step at a time until it's all the way back. All right. So that kind of sums up my demonstration here. So what we did is we looked at these line and curve labels. We looked at label styles. We looked at parcel segment styles, parcel styles, and segment table styles. We looked at editing these styles or creating a new style, in this case with the spline. We add an expression. And then we looked at labeling and repositioning these labels by moving them with the grips. And then we finally looked at creating tables and also creating tags for the different label styles.